that would be it doesn't get any better than that. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is David Kennedy. I'm the Associate Artistic Director here at the Playhouse. And I welcome you to our Sunday Symposium, which is this year sponsored by U.S. Trust. And my guest this afternoon is Playwright David Ives.
Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day, mothers.
Yeah, absolutely. David's perhaps best known for his evening of one-act plays All in the Timing and his smash hit Venus in Fur, which was recently filmed by Roman Polanski. His 4-decade-long career as a writer has encompassed everything from short plays to verse drama, classical adaptations, screenplays, Broadway musicals, novels, and young adult fiction. His latest New York success, unless there's something else I don't know about, was just this past winter, an evening of short plays called Lives of the Saints, which was praised by the New York Times as continually piquant and pleasurable, sometimes deliriously daffy, and surprisingly moving. He's contributed to Spy Magazine, has written humor pieces for the New York Times and the New Yorker. He is a prolific artist and man of the theater, and I am pleased to welcome him here today. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
I want to start with something you told me a while back, which was that The Liar is a play that you're particularly fond of. You've had a long, rich career, so what is it about The Liar that stands out for you?
I actually wasn't lying. That was true. I continue to feel that, actually. I was approached by Michael Kahn, who runs the Shakespeare Theater in Washington. He sent my agent a play called Le Menteur by Corneille. And I had never heard of this play. My agent had never heard of it. Nobody I asked had ever heard of it. And they seemed to have this idea that I was a French translator, which is rather funny. I mean, I had a few years before done a version of A Flea in Her Ear, the Feydeau farce, because the Shakespeare Theater of Chicago approached me for a new version, and I decided I wanted to work from the French, but all of my French, as some of you may have read in the program, was based on a year and a half in college and a girlfriend who lived in Paris for a while. Which actually is sufficient, I found. You know, it's an easy language. There are no rules or anything. The French don't really care how you speak it. They're so loose, you know. It's so nice. And anyway, so I somehow did this version of Flea in Her Ear, which was a big hit. And then Classic Stage asked me if I would do a play of Yasmina Reza called A Spanish Play. And because John Turturro was directing it and Zoe Caldwell was in it with a bunch of other actors, I said I would do that. And so I suddenly found myself doing the second French play for a living playwright, which was intensely scary. And but then the Shakespeare Theater sent my agent this play called The Liar by Corneille from 1643, in verse, of course, as all plays from this time were. And I read it over the course of a couple of days, and I just absolutely fell in love with it. I felt as if somebody had handed me this beautiful gift. It was like somebody had handed me a Shakespeare play, but it was in French, and nobody knew about it. And so I said yes. I immediately said yes. And so my only question was how to do this. And of course it's in verse, and the first question was, do I do this in prose? Do I do this in verse? What do I do? And the thing is, The Liar is a play about, it's really a play about an artist. You know, this is a man who walks on this tightrope of words and makes up his life as he goes along, and that essentially is what I do day by day. So I felt a kinship with Durand, having been doing it for decades, you know. And so I decided that the play had to walk the same tightrope of words that he is on, and so I decided it had to be in verse, and I decided it had to be in rhyming couplets, which, as you know, are death to the theater, traditionally. And you know, they're very good in French, but very hard in English. And so, but I decided, what the hell? What did I have to lose? Because it just felt right. So what I did was, I spent about 2 or 3 months reading The Liar. I would read it every day. But every morning before I began work, I would read out loud some Shakespeare to myself. I started with all the sonnets, and I would read 2 or 3 to myself, just to see how he worked iambic pentameter and how he varied the beat and made it work. Iambic pentameter being the meter that's always used in English, 10 beats to the line, as opposed to French, which is 12 beats to the line. In any case, what happened was I fell in love with iambic pentameter, and every day as I took my daily walk through New York City, I would translate everything I saw into iambic pentameter. It's like lingerie ads on buses, and I'd read the New York Times and I'd turn sentences into iambic pentameter, and it just became this incredible obsession. And then I started writing the play, and I was in love with the world of this play, which is to me, very silvery. It's like this rippling, I had this image in my head of this very rippling, silvery stream. And so it took me about 3 months to write it. And then we rehearsed it in Washington, and the rehearsals were a dream. And then it went up, and it was a big hit for them. So this was one of those occasions when the work every day was the most fun thing in the world, and it continued all the way through my walk and the rest of my day with lingerie ads and iambic pentameter. And then I would come back to it every morning. Rehearsals were a dream. I had wonderful actors, and so it was just one of those rare theatrical experiences when every minute of it was a delight. And since this play is so much about delight, I felt like it was all of a piece, and that's why it has this special place in my heart. Did you specifically give me a comic microphone that does this? It's like I feel like I'm in a Chaplin movie. Actually, at least it doesn't fall that way. But I had this continual kind of sinking thing. Here's an art to comedy, and now I know a new one. I'm going to use this sometime. Trust me, it's going to show up in a play.
Was it liberating to have the plot taken care of, and all you really had to worry about was sort of the language in which it would be delivered?
Yeah, actually, the thing is, I'm very bad at plot, and that's why I love to adapt. I adapted 33 musicals for the Encore series in New York. I don't do it anymore, but I love being handed something that I can play with. Just because I'm bad at story, because when I'm faced with a story, all I know is all of the possible ways this story could go, and it's very hard for me to choose how to work the most effective plot. But having a structure for me is so good, because then I can just kind of play. Because to me, playwriting is to some playwrights I know who are of my acquaintance. To them, playwriting is a form of problem solving, and to me, it's a form of improvisation. I sit down, not really knowing quite what I'm going to do, and I let other people speak, and generally I get interested in what they have to say. And so to have this story given me was great. I have to tell you, this is not quite The Liar as Corneille wrote it. I mean, I did elaborate a little bit. I think of myself as having done all the things that Corneille would have done if he'd had the time, like 350 more years. And he spoke English. It's like there are not twin maids in the original, but the original maids are very dull, and they're very small parts, and I thought, A, I could make them more interesting, and B, I could save the producer some money. And it's a play about duality. It's about truth and lies, and so I also gave Cliton this problem that he can't ever tell a lie, and created that problem. So things like that I added to it. I must say that there is not a missing cruller in Corneille. It's because when we were right about to open in Washington, and the ending, I had sort of Corneille's ending, and it just didn't work. And because in the original, in these French plays from this time, what happens in this play is that at the end, Durand finds out that Lucrece and he's had Lucrece and Clarice mixed up, and he goes, oh, I'll marry her. And the father says, fine, and the play ends, you know? And that just doesn't wash, you know, these days. And so we were just about to open, and I said to Michael Kahn, well, I've got to do some work on the end. And so I went back to New York, and I wrote a new ending, and I faxed it to him, which was this ending. And he just wrote me back, and he said, it's great, we're putting it in. And that's how this ending got onto this play. So that's part of the fun of it, and that's why it was so much fun, was that feeling of this play kind of bubbling up underneath me, and all I had to do was kind of be there to you know, not catch the bubbles, but help them on their way.
Even the most casual reader of Shakespeare will recognize that you liberally sprinkled many quotes and neglected plays through this play. Was that a result of reading those plays and sonnets while you were working on it, or entirely unrelated? Or?
It was unrelated. You know, I hadn't put that together actually until you just asked me. But I thought, wouldn't it be funny? I just had him come up with this line of Shakespeare. It was when he lies about the feast, you know, on the boat. And I started with the line from Antony and Cleopatra, on the barge she lay in like a bird is thrown, burned on the water. And I thought, well, that's funny. What if every time he lies, he starts with Shakespeare? And so that was the way this play got written. It was just, as I say, riffing. It was improvisation.
A lot of critics have remarked on your love of puns.
Really?
Yes.
Are there puns in this play?
I don't know. I wanted to ask you.
Wow. They must have crept in. You know, unlike Dr. Johnson, I don't think puns are the lowest form of humor. You know, I love a good groan out of an audience. And, you know, it makes the audience feel very smart, you know, because they go, oh, God, that, yeah, right. You know, but they also enjoy it in a kind of childish way. Puns, you know, puns are so childish, and I like that aspect. I like that feeling of play, and you also get to find out if the audience is actually listening. If they don't groan during the puns, you know, that's when you worry.
What else makes you laugh?
You know, nothing makes me laugh these days. In fact, I was just reading somebody who said, what was I reading? Was it, oh Christ, who was it? Maybe it was E.M. Forster, who said that people laugh less as they get older, and I must say I'm living proof of that. Because I find myself in front of comedies that I've always adored, you know, absolutely stone-faced. So it takes a lot to sort of do that to me anymore. But, you know, writing does it. It's like, I well remember working on this play, sitting in my tiny little writing room, and just laughing, you know. So I think of my job as to make myself laugh, and second of all, to make my wife laugh. And she has a great laugh. And so if I can do that, well, there's my job.
How much of the testing ground of the actual rehearsal process tells you about a play? Obviously, The Liar's been out in the world for a number of years, but when you were first working in Washington with Michael Kahn, did you have moments where once you saw it staged, or once you heard it in the mouths of actors, you really felt that what made you laugh in the writing room was needed work, or was something that didn't quite translate?
No, I generally know when I hear a group of actors read a play through the first time, what's what. I don't know, I've been doing this for so long that if you get actors who are good, they will, for example, I have basically a rule, if an actor can't make something work in 3 goes at it, and the actor is good, then it's not his problem, it's my problem, and I've got to fix it. And so if a joke is not landing, or if I can see an actor struggling, if he's a good actor, it's my problem, not his. Because, you know, I don't have a very exalted view of playwrights. I think of myself as a slave to actors. You know, very few plays are literature, very few plays are worth reading. They're there to be played, and without an actor, I am nothing. And without a good actor, I am really nothing. And so I believe that it's my job to make actors do what they do best and make them shine. And so that's why the text changes, you know, can change radically in rehearsal.
Speaking of changes, I know that the version of The Liar that we've done here is slightly different than the original published version. You're now prepping or have finished prepping a version for 3 of the verse plays that you worked on, published in one collection. So what inspired those changes? Did you feel that there was something you hadn't quite gotten right? Was it a matter of burnishing a language a little bit, polishing here and there? Was it major stuff?
Well, yes, I've done 4 plays in verse. And it's because this was the first one, really. I just realized, having done this play after Washington, that I really hadn't learned writing verse well enough. And so when it was done in Chicago, I went to Chicago and I did some fixing, but it's all about verse. It's all about making it flow better. I'd also kept some sort of archaicisms in the original version, and I just came to hate them. Because, you know, if you don't write a play for today, there's no point in writing it. I'm no fan of museum theater. I'm no fan of doing a play just because somebody great wrote it 400 years ago. If it's not a good play, worth playing, that actors can't make work, then I don't see the point of it.
Your work is made of bits and pieces of experience you've picked up along the way. I'm wondering what looms especially large for you, you know, in your grade school education in terms of, you know, foundational influences.
I think that my foundational influence was playing the wolf in Little Red Riding Hood in the 3rd grade, opposite Amy Skean, with whom I was in love. And I think that was it. I think it was all over at that point. It was a transformative experience. My mother made my costume. What more can a playwright want? You know?
Did you write this play?
No, I didn't write this play, but we were so good we toured to the 4th and 5th grades. And you know, when you have a hit, when you're 10 years old, you're in. So that was, I really don't know what made me want to be a playwright or what did it for me. My parents took me to dinner theater when I was a kid. You know, I grew up in Chicago, and we would go see Agatha Christie plays at a dinner theater with, you know, John Saxon in 10 Little Indians, you know, things like that, and the clinking of, you know, forks, you know, while it's going on. And maybe, you know, I missed that clinking, by the way. I think we should pipe some in. But what really happened I got very taken by Shakespeare, and I used to read it out loud to myself. I used to sit in my room and read pieces of Shakespeare to myself, and I didn't understand it, but the sound of it was so delicious. And then I started going more seriously to theater in high school. And what really happened to me is that when I was 17, I went to a matinee of A Delicate Balance, Edward Albee's play, which was touring in Chicago with Hume Cronin and Jessica Tandy. And you know, there are very few people who can say that they know the day that changed their lives, but I know that day, and it was the day that I sat in the balcony of the Studebaker Theater for $3.65 and saw Hume Cronin and Jessica Tandy do that play, because I had never seen anything so thrilling in my entire life. It was, you know, I came from this blue-collar steel mill family where nobody ever talked. And here I was seeing this family that was so articulate and so passionate and so funny. And what they were doing seemed so profoundly necessary and so painful that I remember, I've often said that sitting in the balcony of the Studebaker that day was like sitting in the front car of the Cyclone roller coaster at Coney Island. It was so thrilling. And I stood at the stage door, and I got their autograph as they came out, you know, as they were on their way to the cab. And I just recently, I found that program, and I found that ticket stub. And, you know, I should have just gone home and written my parents a note and said, "Dear Mom and Dad, I'm going to be a playwright. Don't try to stop me." And so for years I tried to be Edward Albee, which was, of course, a huge mistake. But I'll tell you an interesting follow-up story to that. Which is, I was 17 years old, and almost exactly double in my life. When I was about 35, I was in Los Angeles for my first possible movie job. I was supposed to pitch a movie idea to the president of Universal, you know, and so I arrived, and I remember I got to Los Angeles on a Friday night, Mondrian Hotel. I check in, I go up to the 4th floor, I've got my bags, you know, and the doors open, and there is Hume Cronin standing right in front of me. And he's in a silk paisley, dressing gown, straight out of Milcard, and an ascot. And he's just standing there. Look, it's like a stage, it's like perfect. And so I stepped out and I couldn't resist, and I said, "Hello, Mr. Cronin." And he said, "Oh, hello. Have you seen The Maid?" And I said, "No, I actually just arrived. I haven't seen The Maid." And he said, "Oh, I'm looking for The Maid." And so we started walking down the hall, and I thought, well, here's my shot, So I said, Mr. Cronin, I have to tell you, you and your wife changed my life. And he said, "Really? How did we do that?" And I said, "Well, when I was 17 years old, you came through Chicago doing A Delicate Balance, and it made me want to be a writer." And he said, "Really? Well, what are you doing here?" And I said, "I'm actually in Los Angeles for my first possible movie job." He said, "Oh, really? Where is that?" I said, "Universal." And he said, "Well, Jesse and I are shooting at Universal. Do you want to have lunch tomorrow?" And I said, "Sure." Okay. And so we shook hands, and I go to my room, and I closed the door, and I thought, I just met Hume Cronin. And then my phone rings, and nobody knows I'm there. I pick it up. "Is this David?" "Yes." "This is Hume. We're in trailer 22. Come at 1 o'clock and tell them we're expecting you." And I said, "Okay, great, Hume. I'll see you tomorrow." And so I put down the phone with the person who changed my life. And the next day I drive through the gates of Universal, and I park. I go to trailer 22. Sure enough, there is a brown graduate with a clipboard, with headphones. And she says, "Are you David Ives?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Hume is waiting for you." And so there is Hume Cronin sitting in this trailer, and he said, "Well, come on in, Jesse is still shooting, and so let's talk." And so we're chatting away, and 5 minutes later, the original Blanche Dubois walks into this trailer. This extraordinarily beautiful woman with the bluest eyes you've ever seen. And she said, "You must be the young man whose life I changed." And I said, yes, I am that person." And she said, "Well, tell me about yourself." And so there I am chatting with them, and she said, "Well, I have to go back and shoot, but why don't you go to lunch with Hume?" And so Hume takes me to lunch in the Universal Commissary, and we're walking in, and everybody's turning around going, "That's Hume Cronin. Who is that? That's Hume Cronin. Who is that?" And he was the nicest man in the world. And he was avuncular in the best possible way, and we had this wonderful lunch, and then I walked him back to his trailer, and I still had a little time before my meeting, and I was sitting, I remembered very well, on the sunniest day of the year, on a box of an orange tree in the plaza of Universal Studios, and I kept thinking to myself, you know what? Nothing can ever go wrong. Nothing can ever be bad. You know that feeling when you are just invulnerable? And so I went to the meeting, and I met the head of Universal, and at the end of the meeting he said, "Well, I like that idea. We'll call your agent. It's a deal." And so, it's like I go down in the elevator and I drive out the gate of Universal. And so it's like I had Hume Cronin and Jessica Tandy on two key moments of my life, which is almost enough to make you go to church. It's really, the Church of Cronin and Tandy, or Edward Albee, as forbidding as that may be.
A lot of people who sat in that balcony at 17 might have wanted to, gone away from that wanting to be an actor. What was it that made you know you wanted to be a writer?
Well, I'd already been writing. I wrote my first play when I was 9. It was an adaptation. It was an adaptation. It was probably my best work. But I did it for my Boy Scout trip. What I did was I took this 300-page novel from this really gory crime novel from my parents' library, which I loved, from the 30s, 1929, and I adapted it into a 10-minute play. What I did not know at whatever age I was, 9 or 10, was that everybody who's in the play, I was playing the lead, needless to say, everybody in the play has to get a copy of the script, and so I learned my lines, and I gave the copy of the script to the next guy, and he lost the script. And so the play was off, and it's probably on eBay for $1 million. But I'd been writing for a long time. I didn't know that I was necessarily going to be a playwright. I tried to be a novelist for a long time, and it's not my gift. You have to fill so much of a page, that's what's so hard. Writing plays, you don't have to write that many words. And so I acted, you know, I did act when I was at Yale and when I was at Northwestern and when I was living in Boston. I acted, but I don't need to be an actor. You know, actors need to act the way we need food and drink. And I don't have that urge as much as I enjoy being on stage. And so it was those words, it was those delicious words of Edward Albee's. There's a speech in there about a cat, and I will never ever forget Hume Cronin talking about this cat that would not love him and saying, "Love me, damn you, love me." And I had never heard anything like that in my life. You know, it was a whole world out there, and it was an adult world. Don't forget I was 17, and I so badly wanted to be an adult, and it was like I had a lens right into it. It was terrifying and thrilling and musical. The music of that language was so brilliant.
So your early efforts inspired by that were sort of derivative of Edward Albee.
Yeah.
How long did that go on for? I mean,
too long. You know, I had a play in New York, which one of my first plays was on in New York, and I refer to it as my Tennessee Pincher play. You know, it had all the faults of those two playwrights all wrapped up in one. And you know, but you learn. I didn't really start writing comedy until I was into my 30s, after I'd gone to Yale. And I must say, when I think about why, I think it's because, actually, at that point, for the first time in my life, I was earning some money as a writer. And I didn't have to worry about paying the rent. I didn't have to worry about temp typing. And also just at that moment, I met the woman that I'm married to, and so I think the combination of love and money, you know, that feeling of wanting to make her laugh, and the fact that I had some money in the bank, just made me write whatever the hell I wanted to. And because you need to feel free to write comedy, you know, you have to feel you have to be able to feel unrestrained, and I think for the first time in my life I did.
Did you feel you always had those impulses earlier on, but you kind of squashed them, or
comedy?
I mean, not even necessarily as a writer, but in life, were you the kind of person who had a comic perspective of the world? Or did that develop in your 30s?
I don't know. I really, you know, yeah. I don't know where it came from, and I try not to inquire too deeply.
Into the mystery. An interesting tidbit from those days, which I didn't know, and I'm sure a lot of people don't know, is one of your survival jobs was as an editor of foreign affairs.
Yes, I was an editor of foreign affairs.
Which is truly mind-boggling in a certain way. I mean, that's such a venerated publication, and you were quite young when you had that position. And so how did that come to pass? Do you have expertise in foreign affairs?
I have, well, none. It was, you know, that was, three lucky things have happened to me. I met Martha, I got the apartment we live in, and I got that job. And the way I got that job was as unexpected as running into Hume Cronin at the Mondrian Hotel. What happened was that I was a great typist. I still am. You know, I could type 120 words a minute. And so I would go out on temp typing jobs, making $4 an hour. So one morning, I was 28 years old, I got a call from my temp agency, and they said, "We've got a great job for you. It's working at a very prestigious magazine doing dictaphone typing for the editor-in-chief." And I said, "Great, where do I show up?" And they said, "You go to the Council on Foreign Relations and you report to William H. Bundy." And I said, wait a minute. Do you mean William H. Bundy, who ran the Vietnam War? And they said, yes. I said, William H. Bundy, who was responsible for Operation Thunder? And they said, yes. And I said, William P. Bundy, the former Assistant Secretary of State who I marched against? You know? Yes, him. And I said, I won't do it. I have my principles. I absolutely will not do it. And they said, we'll give you 4 1/4. And I said, where do I go? You know, which is all we need to know about ethics. And so I reported to William P. Bundy, and what I didn't know was that he had fired 3 temp typists in the last 3 days because none of them knew how to type. And I show up carrying some huge novel, you know, and he would come out to catch me, you know, and I would be reading my novel. And so he had no idea what to make of me, but we got along brilliantly. And at the end of 3 days, I did something I'd never done, which is walk into his office, and I said, "Excuse me, Mr. Bundy, you wouldn't have to have any jobs around here, because don't forget, this is in a mansion on Park Avenue." It's like I walked up a marble staircase every day to my little temp typing job. And it was this, Henry Kissinger would pass me in the halls, and the Chinese ambassador would be in the bathroom. And so, it's a nice job. It's a nice job. And I'm carrying peanut butter sandwiches and foil, And so I said, "Do you have a job?" And he said, "Well, actually, we're looking for a junior editor on this. Why don't you leave your resume?" And so I left my resume. What I did not know is that they had a pile of resumes of people with doctorates, from Princeton and Johns Hopkins. But I interviewed with all of them, and he knew that I was a good typist. And so I got this job, and on the day that I started my job, the managing editor said to me, "You don't know anything about international relations, but we're very happy to have you." And so I spent 3 years on the best job in the world. I ended up adoring William Bundy. He became a great friend and a kind of inspiring mentor to me. And so every day I went to this mansion, and my lesson from that job was that I'd already had a bunch of plays done in New York, and I was staying up till 4 in the morning writing. And my lesson was that I have the best job in the world, and it's not enough. And so I went to Yale Drama School. I just dropped that and went to Yale and took another turn. Went immensely into debt and got to experience the weather in New Haven,
Not to mention the lights of New Haven crime,
Yes.
especially in the early 1980s.
The 1980s.
Yeah, I mean, what was your time at the drama school like? What did that give you?
It was wonderful. It was Lloyd Richards was the dean. I was there at a particularly rich time for actors. Actually, William Cux is here. He's an actor at Yale at that time. But we had John Turturro, Angela Bassett, Frances McDormand, Lila Robbins. I mean, it was an amazing batch of actors. And so I just wrote up a storm, and I had 4 plays done there in 3 years, and I got an agent out of it. And so it was heaven, heaven in slush up to here.
And then you had this kind of incredible success, which to those who didn't know your career up to that point seemed like an overnight success, but of course it was not. But with All in the Timing of primary stages in the early 1990s.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about short plays, because we were talking at lunch about how short story writers, in a way, work on the margins of the literary world. That until Alice Munro won the Nobel Prize, they don't really get a lot of respect. Short playwrights, or playwrights of short plays, I should say, probably even less so. It's a genre that is almost non-existent now. Why did you want to work in that? And
well, it's not that I wanted to work in it. I sort of just did. I've never really planned anything in my life successfully. I didn't plan working at Foreign Affairs or running into Hugh Cronin or much of anything. And so things have sort of come to me. And so, as I say, I started writing these short plays just to amuse myself late at night, because I had these ideas that seemed like ideas that would fill 12 minutes. And at that time, there was a place called the Manhattan Punchline, which did a yearly one-act festival on 42nd Street, 3 nights of one-act plays. And the Manhattan Punchline was basically a broken fax machine and an artistic director having a nervous breakdown. And so it was a perfect place to work. You had no costumes, you had no set, you had to write a good play. And so every year I started writing these little comedies, and every year they'd do 1 or 2 of them. And a director who directed some of them said, "Why don't we do an evening of these?" And it wasn't my idea. He came up with the title even. And I said, "Sure, if you want to." So he went all around town he took these plays to every theater in town, and everybody turned them down. Everybody said there was no market for one-act plays. Nobody wanted the evening of one-act plays. These plays were too unconventional to attract an audience. And finally, Primary Stages reluctantly agreed to put up the evening, and we ran for 606 performances, off Broadway. We moved from a 99-seat house to a house about as big as this, and we ran for over 2 years, and it's been done all over the place. And so, you cannot plan. you know, if theater teaches you anything, it's that Buddhism is actually realism. You know, it's like you simply cannot try to fashion a life. You have to allow your life to happen, which is kind of what I've done. And I'll tell you a story about the opening night of All in the Timing. Two things are important about the opening night. A, the director and I were not talking. So it was this miserable night full of strife and stress. And when he saw me walk into the lobby of the theater, he turned his back on me. That was what rehearsals for All in the Timing, this big success, were like. And B, you know, the great tension of waiting for reviews, especially back then, because the reviews came out around 11 o'clock that night, you know, 12 o'clock that night. And so what had happened that day was that the artistic director of Primary Stages called me up and he said, I have to tell you something that happened today. Somebody called the box office and asked for 12 tickets to All in the Timing. And the person in the box office said, 12 tickets, that's quite a good number of tickets. How do you know about the show? And the person said, I know from the New York Times. And the box office person said, how do you know from the New York Times? From the review in the New York Times. And the box office person said, it won't be out till midnight. And the person said, no, I work at the New York Times. Do you want to hear the review? And it was a huge rave. And so, you know, it was the one time I went into an opening night just kind of, you know, on a cloud. I had nothing to worry about. I had nothing to worry about except that the director might kill me.
And everything must have changed significantly for you after that.
Yes, well...
in terms of the opportunities afforded you, your visibility, your...
Yes, but you know, every play is a cliff you go off of and hope the wings open. And so, you know, it doesn't take away from the difficulty of or the challenges of writing the next play. Because you know, Moss Hart once said something very true. He said, you never really learn how to write a play. You learn how to write this play. And so that's been true, but All in the Time was a wonderful thing.
Maybe you're not supposed to ask this, so if I'm not supposed to, just let me know. But what are you working on right now? What's up next for you, David?
I'm working on a musical with Stephen Sondheim, which we've been working at for a while, which is great fun. That's another thing I didn't plan. I knew Sondheim, you know, as one knows people in the theater. I knew him. I'd say hi to him at things, and was always happy to see him. But he called me up one day, and he said, would you like to come over to my house for a drink? I have something I want to talk about. It's not important. And I said, okay. And I'd never been to his house. So I go to his beautiful townhouse on 49th Street, and we're sitting and we're drinking, and we're drinking, and we're drinking. And finally I said, so Steve, what did you want to talk about? You said it wasn't important. And he said, did I say that? And I said, yeah, you said it wasn't important. He said, well, I guess it is sort of important. I have this idea for a musical, and I was wondering if you'd want to work on it. And I said, what's the idea? And he told me the idea, and I said, oh, that's a great idea. And he said, well, good, because actually I've been taking notes for several years, and I have them right here. Why don't you read these? And so he gives me this manila envelope full of notes, and they were great. And so we started work, and that is one of the things I'm working on. And you know, it's like having Mozart call you up and say, do you want to come over to the Kirche Gasse and listen to me play a little something for you? You know? And he is the most fun in the world. He is a man who loves to laugh. And so our first half hour is always dish and laughter, and then work. I'm working on a project that John Rando and I are putting together of a kind of performance piece, which I can't be more explicit about than that, but that's really what I'm writing in the morning, day by day, when I sit down after breakfast. And I just wrote a movie that some producers want to make, so I'm, you know...
You're busy.
Busy.
We have time, we have time for some questions from the audience, if anyone has something they'd like to ask. Any hands? Show of hands? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, this is a silly question, but you said you're turning lingerie into iambic pentameter. When you wrote writing a play like Short Thing, did you start to hear bells going off, giving things a second chance? I mean,
Oh yeah, I always say them out loud. I do the whole play. Yes, I hear the whole play in my head, and I speak it out loud. So yes, I heard the bell. But I didn't know I was going to write a play with a bell in it until I sat down and I didn't know how to write that play, and I thought, oh, maybe I'll divide it up with bells. So I wrote a bell.
Who else? Yes, sir.
So it was a wonderful afternoon. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
I enjoyed it so much. But I was wondering if there are any plans to bring this to New York, or if it's been in New York.
No, this is the one play. This play has somehow been scheduled 3 times and not happened 3 times for theater scheduling mishegoss, which is always horrible. But it's supposed to happen in the fall of 2016. Classic stage.
Scheduled always with the same company or 3 different companies?
No, it was always the same place. Classic Stages scheduled it, and then something happened with either the director or something, or some play they had to do.
And will you be involved in that production?
Well, I'm always, it's New York. I'm always necessarily in the room. So yeah.
Other questions? Yes, ma'am. On the
You did this in Washington and then in Chicago. Did you have this marvelous movement all about the stage play?
Yes. It's this is the play. This is the play.
It's just marvelous.
It didn't look quite like this. I love these trees, by the way. They're genius. But yes, it was this.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
To pick up on when you said you love the trees, the shimmering and the sintering and the colors of what has transformed to make it so modern, even though it's from another century, many centuries ago. How many kinds of input do you put in? Because it's old and it's really new. One of his last speeches was so fresh and so real.
She's asking about the mixture of old and new. And, it's what I said about museum plays. I think you have to write a play for today. There is no point in writing dialogue for 1643 or for 1843 or 1943. If it's not fresh, if it's not direct, if it's not speakable, then what's the point? And I'm writing for my wife and my friends, and so I want them to have a good time.
You mentioned something about 3 things. You spoke about foreign affairs, you spoke about a nice apartment, which you're
And meeting my wife.
and your wife, Martha. How did you meet her, and how did you find she shimmered for you?
Well, my wife, I met my wife the way everything's happened to me. I was broke. I was on a temp typing job after that first movie thing. I paid off my debts and I was broke again. I was temp typing at a publisher, and there was a woman walking right in front of me down the corridor who didn't know me. I'd never seen her. And she turned around and she smiled at me. And she had the best smile in the entire world. And so I went to my boss and I said, there's a woman who works here. And I tried to describe this woman, and my boss said, I don't know who you're talking about. And finally she said, oh, does she look very clean and healthy? And I said, yes. She said, that's Martha, she's upstairs. And I decided I was going to do something I'd never done in my life, which was, it was my last day. I was going to walk upstairs, find this woman's office, introduce myself to her, and ask her out, all at the same time. And so, I screw my courage to the sticking place, and I start walking up the stairs, and as it happened, she was walking down. And we met on a landing, and I started talking very fast. And I asked her out, and that was 29 years ago, so that's how that happened. I think we only have time for that.
Yeah, 2 more questions. Yeah, on the aisle, ma'am?
What was the political situation or the social situation in France at the time that this play was written?
She's asking
what was the social situation in France at this time? It was Louis XIV. It was court. It was Versailles. It was all of those movies you've seen with people in wigs, and it was very court-centered.
So it's as important for men to make a good match, men of a certain social class to make a good match.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was very important. And this is a classic French. So many French novels, movies, plays are about young men from the country who come to the city looking for a wife and a life. And this is right in that mold. So yes, it's certainly in that kind of great French tradition.
We have to get David to the train. He's been so generous with his time this afternoon.